don't think any of us expect Gordon to be on this team past the trade deadline. At least I would be. I would be somewhat surprised. Maybe you disagree, but it feels like at this point it would be time to part ways with him. Where are you at on this thing?
So I don't think they will trade Martin under any circumstance right now. I think that he's too young and too valuable, and he's just playing at such a high level right now. I think that they probably believe he is part of their future, and he should be. He's been that good, really, since training camp started. On the Gordon stuff, I have heard the same thing about a three-team deal, and I had heard basically a three-team trade with them. It's funny that it's Milwaukee and Phoenix. They're playing on back-to-back days, on back-to-back games, just because this is the rumor was basically they would send Gordon to Phoenix. Phoenix would be sending Jay Crowder to Milwaukee, and then basically the Rockets would, and George Hill goes from Milwaukee to Phoenix, and then the Rockets would get back Grayson Allen from Milwaukee, Landry Shamet from Phoenix. But there were no picks involved, and I think that's the holdup again, is that the Rockets would like to get a first round pick for Eric Gordon, and right now it's just not out there for him. So it's still very early. It's only December 12th. You got a couple of months until the trade deadline, but I do think that they would want a first round pick. And I don't know. It was interesting to me that they would seem interested in the Grayson Allen Landry Shamet package, just because those two guys are owed money next season. And it kind of felt like, well, they probably want to keep as much, flexibility, financial flexibility as possible going into free agency, but they can roll their cap space into next year, into the 2024 season, because they basically have 2 summers worth of cap space, where really the cap space is gone once they have to do the extension for Jalen Green, once his extension kicks in. So they've got some time. And really the 2024 free agency class is much better than the 2023 free agency class. So it would make sense to try and roll that over a year if you can. And maybe, to me, on the surface, that trade didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because you are adding money to your payroll for next year. But at the same time, Grayson Allen could have value somewhere else. Same thing with Landry Shamet. So maybe you're able to pawn those 2 guys off to another team and get, maybe another asset here, an asset there. So that's the trade that I had heard going back probably a month ago, of a possible 3-way trade with them, Phoenix and Milwaukee. I don't see KJ Martin going at any point this season, but we could see Gordon go. I do think that they value him. They value his leadership in the locker room. They value his leadership on the floor. So if the right deal comes across, then my guess is they would trade him. But I didn't think they would trade him last year. They didn't. It kind of felt like they were headed towards trading him before the draft, but that trade never materialized. So we have to wait and see. But I mean, Eric Gordon's a really good player, and he should be valued across the league, especially for a team trying to win a championship. And I guarantee you there will be teams that will be interested in him.
Yeah, and it doesn't it help a little bit that he doesn't have guaranteed money after this year. Like it seems like that would help in at least some flexibility for the on the Rockets end. And I don't know, it just for me adding money, I feel like it's an interesting space, adding money on and like what type of player, what is it? What type of player are you getting in return that's worth that? Like you play out the scenario, let's say Grayson Allen, for example, of maybe you can flip him or Landry Shamet, and maybe you can flip them into something down the road. But like, is that worth whatever money you take on? Like, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's cool that they have the flexibility that they're able to weigh that exactly, and that's probably the benefit of it. But I don't know. I guess it just seems like if there was any time to get something for Eric Gordon, and like you said, like you just mentioned now, there should be teams interested. It seems like the market would meet the expectation to the long and short of it, right? Like at this point, with the flexibility of the deal, like it seems like somebody would be interested and you'd be able to offload that.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think the one thing that makes Gordon's situation a little complicated, you talk about how he has no guaranteed money for next season, but it's not like it's a team option. It's not even a player's option. It's essentially a vesting option where if you trade for him and you win the championship, now that year is guaranteed for next season. So that kind of, it messes with your finances a little bit where
but then it's worth it though, right? Like at that point, I mean, like, do you not overpay on the next year for the benefit of the success of the season?
You would think, but also at the same time, you're planning out, financially, going forward the next year, the year after that, the year after that, and that's kind of what your budget is. Now, all of a sudden, if you are looking at, well, we're going to be in the tax next year. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to add, another $20 million to your payroll, and then to what your luxury tax bill might be. That's a lot of money that you're adding, and I think that's why a team like Phoenix wasn't really in play for him last year because of how much money they would have had to pay him for this season to go along with what their luxury tax bill was already looking to be. So I think that's the one complication. If he had no money, if he was just a free agent after this season, it was clean like that, then I think he's a little bit easier to trade. But because there is the prospect that you might have to pay him that money, if this were baseball, it's a little bit different because you don't really have the same type of luxury tax considerations that you have in the NBA. And all these teams in the NBA who are competing for championships are always really, really good, and they're always going to be over the cap and right in that luxury tax territory. And so you're basically, it's Eric Gordon, and yeah, you might win a championship, but you're also spending a whole lot of money to get it. Some teams, like if it's Golden State, they don't care. They're willing to pay whatever, but that's not going to be the case with everybody.
What would you do with KJ Martin? Like right now, gut feeling, what is he worth on a long-term extension? Is it the 12 to 14 million dollars that, like, is it less, like, what is it? It's kind of hard for me to predict a reasonable contract for a guy like that who's still trying to get a defined role but clearly has upside and special qualities. Like, you see things that he and Jalen Green do athletically, and you're like, whoa, they only have like a guy or two like this, or a few guys that are like this athletically, and you can see where the upside and the intrigue would be. Like, what do you think about his market? How is it materializing so far?
You know, I don't. It's hard to judge what a player is worth to one team compared to another. But if you told me that they would do, a 4 years, 60 million type deal with KJ Martin, I think that's more than fine. And part of it is the way the money looks today will be very different from the way the money looks a couple of years from now when the cap spikes. So the cap is going to spike in a couple of years, and now all these deals look very, very different. And you remember the max extension that James Harden signed with the Rockets right after he was traded. I mean, he was going to be looking at making like $16 million in like the third or fourth year of that contract, and here's Ryan Anderson on the team making 20. So the deals that are signed today are not going to look nearly as expensive as the deals that are signed in a couple of years. And I think the way that his contract, that things are sort of set up, I think it's very similar to Chandler Parsons going back 6 or 7 years, where we're actually going back to 2014. So we're almost coming up on a decade. But Parsons, for that, after the third year of his contract, he had an option. If they exercise that option, he would have been unrestricted after the fourth year. But if they decline the option, then he would have been a restricted free agent. It's very similar to what they just had with Jayshawn Tate. For me, I would go ahead and decline the option for next year and try to get something done and try to get something signed. And if someone wants to give him an offer sheet, they can go ahead and give him They can go ahead and give him an offer sheet. We'll match it because whatever he's getting paid this summer, it's going to look very, very cheap a couple summers from now.
Yeah, I'm with you there so far with KJ. I think a lot of what I've seen from Rockets Twitter, both media and fans, is KJ's a starter. It's so funny. We're talking about the Eric Gordon rumors. It's just so funny watching him out there. Just thinking about how he was there for the glory days, and like you mentioned, how he's been a professional through all of this. And there are a lot of fans that are like frustrated watching him out there. Most of us have like a ton of respect for Eric Gordon because of just what he's meant to the team and the professional he's been throughout the league for as long as he's been doing it. And you're not going to get too many people to say much bad about Eric Gordon either. So like there's that as well. But KJ Martin is like, you hear the whispers of like, hey man, that he feels like he should be starting. Like maybe he should be a starter. And we've talked about this before. Like, how much does it matter if he's going to end up playing starter minutes, if he's going to end up being in the game in crucial moments, or play crucial minutes? Like, they'll ultimately treat him like a starter if he plays that way, whether he's starting or not, whether Eric Gordon stays around or not. but there certainly feels like, and I don't know if it's awkward at all because everybody's so cool about it, but there definitely does seem like a passing of the guard of like, here's Eric Gordon, the established player who probably still is easily one of your five best players on the team, deserves to be in the starting lineup, but also KJ Martin emerging as a guy that clearly deserves at least a shot at that at a time when you're developing and trying to figure out exactly what you have with what you've drafted and signed.
Yeah, and the thing is though, KJ is basically their sixth starter.
Right.
Where on nights where Gordon's not going to play the second game of a back to back, or he's not going to play both ends of a back to back, so Martin starts the game that he doesn't play. And if Kevin Porter Jr. gets hurt one night, then they're just going to slide KJ Martin into that spot as well. So if they have somebody go out 1 through 4, then it will be KJ Martin who gets the start in their place, and they might want to start him. It's they might want to with one of the centers. If something happens there, then maybe they can go small with the lineup. But I mean, you don't have to start to have an impact on a team. And as long as he's playing, and he's playing plenty of minutes, I don't know what the minutes average is right now, but and also just because Gordon's not going to play necessarily. Gordon's probably going to be limited to 30 minutes every single night. So you're seeing Martin get an opportunity with the rest of the starters. And, I mentioned this, when we first jumped on, each of the last 2 games, Martin has gotten 5 minutes with that starting group. And I do think that matters. And that's giving him, experience with those guys. And I think it just shows how much of a priority he really is right now for them.
Well, not just that, Adam. I would say it also is a credit to Martin and how he's developed as a player, that he actually provides you that flexibility, not just as a 3-4 option or 4-5 option or whatever it is. It really is, like you say, 2 through 5, like really interchangeable with almost anybody in the lineup. Like, and even Kevin Porter, like if Kevin Porter Jr. is, like you mentioned, if the point guard is out, you can slide someone down, put him somewhere that makes more sense. Like, and the fact that he can effectively, solid to good play 4 positions now is a credit to him, and something that has created that value with him in the team.
Yeah, I think when he was first drafted, he was thought of more, he'll play some 4 and then he can play some small ball 5. And now it feels like the majority of his minutes this season have come from the 3. And it just shows that how well-rounded his game has become, where I think last year he really struggled to put the ball on the floor, make plays for others. And this year he's doing that at a very high level. He's putting the ball on the floor. He can get out on the break now. He can pass the ball a little bit right now. The 3-point shot has been, a little bit more consistent, but he just knows how to play. And he's turned into a really good defensive player, not just with the highlight blocks, but he's in the right place most of the time. And that matters, oftentimes more than the highlight block. So it's been a really good season for him. I was just interested how he would come in after the offseason and after the summer, and his dad, saying what he said on that one podcast, and then how KJ he said that he wanted to be traded, and he wasn't around Houston very much during the offseason, but he came in and you could tell his game is really completely different today than what it was, back in April. And it's a credit to him for having the focus and for having the drive to do that.